Our next keynote address is going to be on intergenerational and historical trauma and its link to suicide and behavioral health. And our presenter is going to be Amalia Monreal. And Amalia is a licensed clinical social worker. She's worked at the Central Council for Tlingit and Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska for the past 14 years. She's dedicated her career to helping to improve the lives and well-being of Alaska Natives and their families in Southeast Alaska, and she specializes in trauma and healing, and her practice blends Western therapies with American Indian and Alaska Native traditional ways of healing. I'd also like to acknowledge and to thank Lenora Walker, who will be not part of the keynote, but will be participating in the workshops with Amalia. And Lenora has been with Central Council for the last 2 years. She is an Indian Child Welfare Act worker, and she works with families who have experienced childhood trauma. She's also worked with SEARCH, Southeast Alaska Regional Health Consortium, providing mental health and chemical dependency services. And she's also been part of the One is Too Many Suicide Prevention Task Force. So with that, I would like to turn the microphone over to Amalia Monreal.
Yachke tu tats, wasiati. Ka ankla yu hatu sak, linke kenach. Lienedi ayahat, yachte hit, Juneau Kwan. My Tlingit name means mother of the land in this area. I was adopted by the Dog Salmon clan of the Big Dipper House here in Juneau about, 12 years ago, maybe longer. So I'm very honored to be able to speak to you today. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by profession, but I aspire to be a spiritual healer. Today I'm going to talk about a part of my life as it relates to the field of trauma. I'd like to speak to those of us in the helping profession, those who engage in helping relationships, those of us who serve the poor, fight for the underdog, and serve the hardest to serve. I am speaking to my sisters who have survived from traumatic events, and the men I know who have survived. We need to lean on each other, look to each other, and help each other. We need to be mindful of how people should be treated, how we should be treated. We must listen to how we speak, and we must use and choose words that convey hope and words that heal. In 2003, I had the opportunity of hearing Vera Manuel speak, a storyteller from Vancouver, BC. Her commitment in the work and in the field of trauma made an impact, and I was inspired by her. In April of this year, I had the good fortune of attending the 2015 Indian Child Welfare Association Conference in Portland, and I heard Dr. Lorraine Braveheart speak. She has been working in the field of trauma since 1995. I have been following her work because of her knowledge and research in the field of trauma and its impact on Indigenous cultures. Dr. Braveheart identified historical trauma as being cumulative, emotional, and psychological wounding across generations, resulting from group tragedies such as the Wounded Knee Massacre and the forced removal and placement of children in abusive boarding schools. Historical unresolved grief, Dr. Braveheart explains, is the grief that results from intergenerational trauma. And the trauma response is a constellation of characteristics in reaction to traumatic history, similar to other massive group trauma survivors, like Holocaust survivors. The response includes depression, self-destructive behavior, substance abuse, and identification with ancestral pain, fixation to trauma, physical symptoms, anxiety, guilt, and chronic bereavement. I encourage you all to Google Dr. Lorraine Braveheart to learn more about her and her work. I believe one of the greatest impacts of trauma on family and community is silence. It is the silence between men and women, parents and children, brothers and sisters, and all other extended family that creates the void in the community for more negative and destructive influences to thrive. Influences such as alcohol, drug abuse, family violence, sexual abuse, isolation, suicide, and child neglect and abuse that creates such devastation for the individual, the family, and the community. People don't want to talk about the past. The past is where the trauma is. The silence is so powerful that it may not feel safe to talk about what happened back there. People feel remembering because they believe that remembering means to go back there, and back there is a terrifying place. Traumatized people have learned well how to hold back feelings by holding their breath, and how to be silent by isolating. The ones who suffer the most are the children, because they inherit our grief. If we don't talk about it, if we don't heal, we are bound to pass it on. It is the next generation of children who receive our rage, our anxiety, our fears, and our shame in the same way that we received it from our parents. For Alaska Natives, the silence goes back well over 200 years, trained in the art of silence, because it is only in recent years that finally, tentatively, we are talking about cultural oppression and genocide. Genocide in the form of historical trauma applied through diseases to wipe out populations of indigenous peoples. Violent massacres, forced assimilation, regulated fishing, regulated hunting, regulated to death. The indigenous people of Southeast Alaska became alienated from their own home. Non-citizens who couldn't vote, and because they could not vote, they could not own land. The land that they and their ancestors have lived on for the last 10,000 years. The potlatch was outlawed, and their spiritual beliefs, practices, culture, and language were outlawed as well. The forced removal and placement of children in abusive boarding schools and receiving homes contributed to the trauma. All these traumas systematically applied to wipe out a culture and a people. Genocide. We are still impacted by these losses today. Today, removal and placement of children with the Office of Children's Services is emotional and psychological wounding. However, OCS is not the only thing disrupting families. Alcoholism continues to be on the rise. Drugs are prolific. High school dropout rate steadily increases. Lack of education, homelessness, no job skills. All these contribute to the destruction of our Native families and the cultural way of life. We have learned so well to turn on each other. We need to free ourselves from the oppression. Then we must talk about it, break the silence, and name the true source of all the pain. Then we can start to heal. Trauma happens when we are so terrified we think we're going to die. And there's no one to turn to and no one to tell. And no way to release the feelings of terror and shame. In the moment, we must decide how we are to survive, how we are to defend ourselves. There are many ways that we learn how to defend ourselves. Are they defenses or incredibly creative acts of resistance? When we decide to put away all our memories and continue on with our lives as though it never happened. Or when we put away all of our feelings about what happened so that we can remember it without being overwhelmed. Sometimes we build walls of anger to keep people out so we can feel safe. Or sometimes our walls are created from the secrets that we keep. We learn to lie and weave lives of fantasy and pretend with compartments and secret passages to hide our stories in. When the memory finally breaks through, we may not be ready for it, because what usually gets triggered are childhood feelings of shame, unworthiness, and helplessness. The feeling of vulnerability may be overwhelming because we have never allowed ourselves to have these feelings. So we immediately want to put the barriers back up again to stop the grief and to cover the pain. We don't want to know that the cure for the pain is inside the pain. So we slam on the brakes, and we often end up self-destructing and hurting ourselves in the process. And we create another layer of unresolved grief. What needs to happen is for us to be aware of what triggers us, what are the destructive behavior patterns that we get ourselves into to try to stop the pain. Healing from trauma is a process. It is a journey, not a destination. It takes time to heal, and we must commit to make a conscious daily effort to practice self-care and self-love, and to look for every opportunity to correct our experiences of the past. How do we shift that trauma story that kept us powerless for so long so that it becomes a story of courage and triumph? We begin by identifying and acknowledging our strengths and appreciating the fact that we would not be here today if it were not for those strengths. Sometimes trauma survivors have a difficult time identifying even one strength. So maybe we need to ask someone who knows us to give us a list of those qualities that they appreciate about us. Showing up at a healing event is a strength. Having the courage to sit in a healing circle and to listen and support others while they are sharing is a strength. Having the courage to tell our story is a strength. Stopping to admire a beautiful sunset or hear a bird's song is a spiritual strength. When we help others by giving them a kind word, this is also a spiritual strength. It's good for our spirit and it's good for theirs. We need to honor that child whose brilliant imagination, resiliency, and determination helped us to survive. Sometimes we forget that we were once that brave and creative being who went through the trauma and never gave up hope that things would get better. It's important to remember that what happened to us was not normal, but that we are normal, and that it is over and we made it through that. We survived it. We have the power to change our life and to have our dreams come true. And every time we heal another layer, we become stronger. And it does get better. We can ask for help. We don't need to do it alone. There are lots of people who care about us. And when we heal in this generation, it impacts 7 generations ahead. When we break through the silence, we bring the circle back together again. I am deeply honored to acknowledge my teachers whose life work inspires and guides me. I thank the Creator for my teachers, Arlene Red Elk, Jerry Musif, Don Coyas, Melinda Snyder, Vera Manuel, and my father, John Monreal. And the tribal citizens that I've had the privilege and the honor of serving and working with. Thank you for teaching me your culture and letting me witness your courage and your determination, your grief and your triumphs. You are a part of my heart. I have been doing this work for a long time, and there was an individual who wrote a poem, and he chose to remain anonymous. But I'm going to read that poem, and then I'm going to introduce you to someone. The poem is called Two Brothers. Two brothers playing hide and go seek, chasing each other on sandy beach, laughing and shouting into the wind, never dreaming that this could end. Two brothers taken to foster home, mom and dad, they took a bad turn. The babies were gone out into the world, no one to protect them from the storm. But little brother, I never stopped loving you. Big brother, you were always my hero. Two men in a cold, dark world shuffled around in foster homes, sometimes together, but coming apart. Two brothers with one broken heart. Bad things happen to children who laugh, who play and run too fast. Bad things happen to children who love, to children who cry, to children who dream, to children who sigh. Shouts turn to whispers and then fade away. Shouts turn to whispers and then fade away. One day soon, there's nothing to say. Little brother gets beat. Little brother, he cries, but there's nobody there, so he keeps it inside. Big brother gets abused and pretend it's okay. He gets angry a lot and learns to survive. Two brothers, two numbers as they shuffle the deck. But little brother, I never stopped loving you. And big brother, you were always my hero. One day in a healing circle, they meet. Two grown men with sorrow etched on their face. Hard men to get close to, hard men to know. Uncover a memory so distant and sweet of laughter and running across sandy beach. Memories of pain and hands that let go. Through grief, reach out. Become brothers again. Through laughter and tears, let each other know. But little brother, I never stopped loving you. And big brother, you were always my hero.